my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. It is Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And my guest today, helping me break it all down, he is a popular TikToker who's had a particular video that's been going crazy recently. That we'll get into all of that. But first and foremost, Antonio Milian, how you feeling, my bro?
Bro, I'm good, man. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate being a guest on here, man. It's an honor.
Of course, man. No, I love what you're doing. I've stumbled across your TikTok, and I just love a lot of the topics that you're covering, especially from the perspective of an Afro-Boricua, right? I think it's a lens that unfortunately is not seen a lot, and we'll get into a bit of that with some of these conversations. But yeah, man, I love what you're doing. So if it's cool with you, I want to talk about a few different trending topics, get your take on it, and we'll dive into a bunch of stuff.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
All right, cool, man. So today on the show, we're going to touch on some stuff. So like when it comes to the BS for the people in the back segment, we'll touch on a celebrity who's been out here wilding. I think everybody probably knows who I'm talking about over here. Man, we'll talk about what's going on in Puerto Rico following Hurricane Fiona, which there still are people somehow, some way without power. So I wanted to talk about that a bit, bring some attention to that. Man, TikTok doing what it's going to do. And it is sadly sullying the good name of one of my favorite Latin treats, which is Tres Leches cake. I've seen some abominations on TikTok as far as new recipes. So I want to talk to you about that. You also have an interesting food video that's what I was talking about that went viral. So we'll touch on that a bit because I think it pokes, man, it showcases, I should say, some glaring holes, unfortunately, within our communities that still exist in 2022. And then on a positive note, in our Mi Gente segment, man, we'll talk about somebody who is finally getting justice after wrongfully being sentenced to prison time. And man, he was there for 35 years. So it's an interesting story about how this man was able to get exonerated for a crime he did not commit. These type of stories scare the hell out of me because, man, you just don't know what could happen at the hands of some of these police. And we'll get into that in this particular story. But man, let's just get into the heaviness. Let's get into the BS in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the Say it louder for the people in the back.
Now, we'll start with this, man, Kanye epic rants that keep on going on. And this man is just digging himself a deeper and deeper hole. And recently he has gone on an anti-Semitic tweet rant. And the one that everybody has been talking about is him saying, quote, DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. This has led to Instagram and Twitter locking him out of his accounts and restricting him from posting. Now, you had someone from our community, John Leguizamo, going on Instagram and talking about this. He says, quote, apparently Ye wasn't getting enough attention, so he fixed that by wearing a White Lives Matter shirt. And then he continues going on to say, quote, just in case people weren't pissed off enough, West then went on an offensive anti-Semitic tweet storm. And what started out as seeming like attention has now gone to like being truly, I mean, I don't know. I mean, even I can't even say the White Lives Matter thing wasn't, disgusting, because it was. But it was more so him poking the bear. But now it's just like you're getting very specific with very,
right,
directed hate messages. And the last thing I want to touch on that he was talking about was like, man, sullying the name of George Floyd. He was on the Drink Champs podcast, which the episode has now been taken down, but he made false, comments saying that George Floyd died from fentanyl and not from the murder of police officer Derek Chauvin by putting his knee on his neck. Now, this is allegedly going to cost him in the form of a lawsuit that the Floyd family is saying they're going to do, $250 million. AOC is tweeting about this and talking about the importance it is to discuss this and to see how harmful and dangerous his words are. And she says, not only to our Jewish brothers, sisters, and siblings, but also to the collective society at large. Man, I just speed off kind of a quick synopsis of what's been going on. I mean, what is kind of your take? I'm sure you've been seeing all that's been happening with him.
Have I? Man, I used to be a huge Kanye fan.
Yeah, same.
Huge Kanye fan. And like, I listen, it's like a sibling that's like on drugs. Like it's hands off. Like you got to watch him from afar. Like you're about to ruin your own life. Yeah. I'm not even going to be here when you come back, you know?
Right.
You know, but you know, Kanye saying white lives matter is like saying Kellogg's has cornflakes. That's the point of the company. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's one of those things where, you know, he's stating the obvious, and at the same time, he's saying it in the same vein as a white supremacist would, which is a rebuttal to Black Lives Matter.
Exactly.
Right? So he's not saying, like, he's not reinventing the wheel.
Right.
He is just creating a different wheel that serves the same purpose, and that's white supremacy in America. Right. He's a sounding board. Him, Candace Owens, a lot of these conservative commentators. I think what they realize is a couple of things, that when you try to bullshit liberals, we catch on.
Right.
When you try to bullshit conservatives, sometimes they don't get it until it's later. Like, so they're out there making money. They're out there pushing this propaganda, and like people aren't getting it, that they're pushing like this anti-Semitic, anti-Black propaganda on just people that are already kind of gullible.
Right.
What's about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, mental health issues aside, right? Because there's no way any of us really know the state of mind that this man might be in, right, or might not be in, right? But that aside, I think also more importantly, when you talk about the Candace Owens of the world, and Kanye now, it's like, it speaks to the fact that, you know, the greatest currency in the world is attention, right? And absolutely, and they have discovered, and Candace Owens, you know, discovered this as an attractive young Black woman. She gets far more attention being, you know, a Republican extremist than she would being a liberal, right? So she's cashing in on that. And Kanye as well, you know, him coming from the hip hop community, him being such an important figure historically of the Black community, and especially when he first came out talking about Black topics. I mean, this is the same man that said George Bush doesn't care about Black people, right? You know, so for him to make this left turn, he knows it's going to have all of us talking about it. We're going to feel something about it. And on top of that, he's going to now tap into a whole nother audience that he wasn't, you know, before. The Tucker Carlsons of the world and all of the cronies that follow them are now jumping on the Kanye train to defend him and are big fans, you know?
Right. And there were some parts of Tucker Carlson's interview, and you know it's really bad when Tucker Carlson won't air it. There were parts of Tucker Carlson's interview that even he was like, yo, this brother is wilding.
Yeah. Like it's bad when you have to get edited out of a Tucker Carlson interview, considering all the nonsense that they put out there.
Right.
And the last thing I want to touch on, because I think this is also a part of the conversation, and it's not as much about Kanye as it is about this, like, quote unquote battle for freedom of speech, right? Especially this last presidency with Trump and all this stuff. This has been a hot topic. But you have a lot of people upset, let's say at Twitter, Instagram, who are shutting him out of his pages. JP Morgan, the bank, said they're no longer doing business with him. What's your take when these companies begin to kind of take a stance on this? And many people will say that it's politically driven. But what's your kind of take on that?
I don't think it's politically driven. I think what he's doing is straight up hate speech. That's my personal opinion. When you look at history, when you look at a historical perspective, especially when you look at anti-Semitic history, there have been people that have said things like this, that have acted on it. Yeah. So Kanye West is a billionaire. He has resources. He has capabilities. He knows people. He hangs around the CEO of Twitter, the old CEO of Twitter. Like, he has the capability to act on what he's saying. It's not just a regular person making 40, 50K a year. This is a man that's multi-billionaire, has contracts with Gap, has contracts. So I think what these platforms are doing is, I think they're being preemptive because they don't know his mental state. They don't know what he's going to say next. And another thing is, like, his bank is like, wait a minute, think about it. You're JP Morgan Chase. This man has billions of dollars in your bank, and he is capable of taking as much money out and doing whatever. Do you really want your hands in the pot of whatever this man is going to do with the money that he has in your bank account? So they're like, yo, We cleaning our hands of this. We don't want nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
And, I mean, from a business perspective, it makes sense because at the end of the day, you want to protect your brand. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they want to protect their brand just like anybody else, just like you would want to protect yours.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's what people are failing to realize. At the end of the day, sure, you can quote unquote say whatever you want to say, but that doesn't mean that you have to have a right to certain platforms, right? Like that's the thing, and yes, you can say whatever you want to say, but actions have consequences, right?
They
and you
100% do.
Right. So like, yes, shit, say whatever you want to say, but then don't throw your arms in the air and act like a victim when the consequences of your actions are now coming out to play. I think that's what so many people are failing to see about this. And to your point, this is a person of large influence, right? I mean, it was the same thing with Donald Trump, and we saw how that played out with January 6th, right?
Yep.
A person of influence speaking, out of pocket and saying crazy shit and activating, their base can be incredibly dangerous, right?
That's right.
So it's the same way, last example, it's the same way that like, if a celebrity tweets, I'm going to be at this location at this time, like the police will show up to break it up because of the danger that could possibly happen from all of those people gathering in one area at a particular time, without proper supervision and without the proper, things being taken in place. That's why when you have an event, you have to have a whole strategy before the event to make sure shit doesn't get out of hand. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So you are 100% correct, my man. I mean, it's a brand. They're trying to protect themselves just like anybody else. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's not worth it for you. And especially in a day and age where, on social media and, this whole idea of being a morally sound business, even if they're just sort of like, doing it just for show, that is an important part of being a brand these days, right? We've seen that where you no longer can sort of just play the middle of the field and not talk about things. People want to know that they are investing their hard-earned money into, businesses and companies that actually stand for something, and don't go against their own moral values. And I think that's what you're saying with JP Morgan and people like that. It's like they understand the bad publicity first and foremost isn't worth having this guy, doing business with them.
And another thing, like some of the banks that are out here now, they've been around for a long time. Like,
sure.
And they've been around like during times when Jews were persecuted. And, some of them have even maybe had some potential funding in some regimes and organizations in Germany. Right. So they're kind of like, it's not going to be a part two kind of situation. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. And it just on every level, it's ridiculous. And even take the comments about Jews out of it. Like, you can't just blanket statement that like one group of people is controlling an entire industry, like he was saying about the entertainment industry, and like make them a target of everybody's anger, essentially, right? Like that's so reckless and dangerous. And also it's just based upon so many like stereotypes and tropes that 100%. Have led to horrendous events for people of that community, and that's the danger in it. Now, moving on, beyond Kanye, let's go to Puerto Rico. I know you're Puerto Rican. I am as well. You see what happened with Hurricane Fiona, and I think that it's now a month out, and because we're not being inundated with the coverage of it anymore, it feels like, oh, everything's probably fine over there now, right? Mm-hmm. But, big shout out to Bianca Gralau, who's been just on the front lines of everything Puerto Rico. And she was covering a couple different stories that are happening right there. And I'm going to read a Twitter quote from her. And she says, it's been 1 month since Hurricane Fiona and 33 people have died in Puerto Rico, according to the health department. Some of those are due to indirect causes like lack of electricity. In case it hasn't been said enough before, reliable electricity is a matter of life and death. And this has been a hot topic in Puerto Rico because of the issues with Luma, who is their electricity provider. Mm-hmm. And the last thing she was touching on was a specific case that she personally saw. And she says, quote, I was in Ponce last week when the emergency management director got a call that another person died due to lack of electricity. It was a woman with health conditions who was still without power almost 4 weeks after the hurricane. There are still people in Puerto Rico who don't have electricity. Right. Man, you hear this stuff as a fellow Puerto Rican. I mean, what goes through your mind?
It's 2022, and it's 2022. You are 700 miles away from me, and we have no problem communicating.
Right.
This is an island where you can, without traffic, you can go from one end of the island to the other in 3 hours.
Right.
And they can't get electricity to people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking that there's more going on here, because I read
Right.
the story, and again, I'm not a subject matter expert on Puerto Rico. I've never lived there. I've visited many times.
Sure.
I'm not a subject matter expert, but when I read these stories from people who are there, like Dean Huertas and Bianca Gralao, when I read these stories from them and I see them reporting on things like mayors turning the power back on, and then this power company, Luma, coming after them.
Right. Right.
It's either you have it or you don't. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Like, if you have the ability to turn the power on, and you could turn the power on, then what is going on? What's going on behind the scenes that's making an electric company come after you? Are they gouging prices? What more is there? And that's what I think. I still have uncles that live in Puerto Rico. They have electricity. They live in actually Toa Baja, but which was hard hit. But at the same time, like, this shouldn't be happening. First of all, this is the richest country in America. This is richest country in the world, right? We have all this advanced technology, and we low key, like, we're not giving Puerto Rico independence, and we kind of as a country pride ourselves in having them as a colony, right? But we're not willing to provide the infrastructure for them to live within the confines of what it means to live in 2022, basically. Yeah. And you have people, I see these stories, like during Hurricane Maria, I saw this story left and right, where people, older people in their 40s or 50s, they were dependent on CPAP machines when they go to sleep because they have sleep apnea. And they would just go into sleep and not waking up because they had no electricity. And you're hearing the same thing happen now. And it's like, there's such a disconnect between the capabilities that we have and the things that this country is not providing to them. Yeah. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too much, but
No, I agree. I think there's no explanation for it, no rational one at least, right? And I think it speaks to, I think, man, the politics of poverty, right? Those who are the ones with the have-nots, and as well as, racism as well, historical racism, because I can't imagine, God forbid, something happened in Beverly Hills and they were without power, like a month going by that they would, that would happen, right? But sadly, in places like Puerto Rico that, they allow stuff like this to happen. I mean, I personally wasn't, in New Orleans, but I've heard horror stories about how they were neglected, for long periods of time because you have, poor Black people living in a lot of those areas that were hit hardest,
Absolutely. So, modern day, even today, like a couple months ago when Florida and Texas shipped all those undocumented migrants to Martha's Vineyard, which is one of the wealthiest places in America. Look how fast they were able to be like, oh, this is inconveniencing us. Let's get them out of here.
Right.
I mean, this is like going back to your point, the politics of poverty. When you have the means to get things done, you're more efficient at getting those things done. And it's like the government doesn't care at the end of the day.
Yes.
And it's sad to see in real time. And I love the fact that we have people that are on the ground level that's like bringing all the bullshit to light, because 50, 60 years ago, it's out of sight, out of mind. If it's not in the newspaper, it's not on the radio, we're not seeing it. But we have independent journalists now that are bringing it to the forefront. And it's a beautiful thing to see. It's a horrible thing to witness.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. And big shout out to them who are doing the work and, keeping the rest of us informed so that we can do our part as well. Now, switching gears, but keeping it within our culture. This is a lot lighter of a topic, but it still pisses me off. So there's this TikTok trend going around, right? And it's all about Tres Leches cake, which by the way, for me is my favorite dessert.
Right.
Anybody not familiar, it's probably one of the most iconic Latin desserts, and it's found in most Latin American countries from Nicaragua to Mexico, Puerto Rico, and everywhere in between, right? Now, TikTok is having like these recipes come up to add stuff to it. And listen, I'm okay with this kind of stuff. I know this is what TikTok does, where they just give you random shit that you never asked for, but somehow you end up watching it, That's kind of the nature of TikTok.
Right.
The one that pisses me off, because it's like, man, if you could colonize a dessert, what would be the flavor? And it's fucking pumpkin spice. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, there is a pumpkin spice Tres Leches trend on TikTok that is going around, and I am not for this whatsoever. I mean, am I alone on this conversation of
I'm,
colonizing our foods?
it's a colonizers will colonize my brother, but I'm gonna let you know it's delicious. I had some a couple of
No,
days ago, man.
no, really?
Man, listen, I felt a little guilty eating it, but my
Right.
ancestors got my back. So I'm hoping that give me a little grace.
Right. I mean, listen, man, I'm judging you a little bit, but low key, I'm not gonna lie. There was a couple on this list that they were doing that I was kind of like, okay, I could try this. Like
Right.
the strawberry crunch Tres Leches, I was kind of on board with a little bit, and the coffee Tres
The
Leches, I'm not
coffee.
gonna lie, I would kind of give that a shot.
Right. I had the pumpkin spice. I'll be honest with you, it was good. Like I said, my ancestors forgive me, but
God bless you, bro. But I mean, listen, let's talk about on the topic of food, because I saw that
Mhm.
you had done recently a TikTok talking about Latin food,
Right.
but foods that have some sort of historical ancestry in Africa, right? That came from
Right.
Africa, and this rubs some people the wrong way. So I mean, let's talk first and foremost what the video was about, and then the reaction.
So the video, I had seen a couple of videos from some mutuals of mine, some big name mutuals of mine, who
Yeah.
were like, horchata, things like that come from Africa.
Right.
And I was like, you know what? I want to expound on that a little bit. I want to talk about more things that come from places where people look like me.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do my research. So I did my research, and these are things that I knew, not only horchata, agua de Jamaica, and like mango, mofongo, and
Hmm.
not necessarily the foods themselves, but the etymology of the words,
Okay.
sancocho, things like that. And I just made a video basically stating that like these are where these things originated.
Right.
Meant no disrespect to anyone else, and it went viral very fast, and
Yeah.
it was crazy because Lizzo liked it, Bianca Gralao liked it. I saw so many blue checks that were
Yeah.
liking that video, and I had to essentially I was getting so many emails from people that hated the video. I had to
Oh
take my
man.
email off the Instagram. I had to take my phone number off the Instagram because people were calling me, telling me how much they hated not only the video, but how much they hated me. Like, I'm
Well,
just a dude that lives in South Carolina, and I have never done anything to anybody. Like, if you see my content, I mind my business. I state history facts, and that
right.
is it.
But what was like the, without getting into like the gross specifics of it, what
Right.
was kind of the general consensus of the negative feedback that you were getting?
Right. People didn't realize that I'm Puerto Rican. And that's
Okay.
been a lifelong thing,
Sure.
Unless somebody sees my name, unless I tell somebody, people, I'm a black man,
Yeah.
and people associate blackness with being African American.
Sure.
And I don't have a problem with that. I'm proud of who I am. I just don't feel like I should be, should I wear like a Puerto Rican flag all the time?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
Right.
whatever. But like people were thinking that I was like an Afrocentrist, which I'm not.
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to realize how indigenous and African cultures came together to make things that we love today.
Right.
Like, for example, and the main thing that people misunderstood about what I was saying is like, one, they didn't think I was Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
And I think that became because I used the word cassava and yuca, which they're the same thing.
Right.
And then I said that Africans used bananas as a starch to make pasteles, Puerto Rican
Yeah.
pasteles. And people thought that I was saying that cassava was from Africa, which is not. It's native to Central and South America.
Right.
And then the other thing is people were upset that I mentioned like horchata being something that came from North Africa, Mali, and Nigeria, when in actuality it does. But in those countries, they use a thing called tiger nut. They don't use rice
Uh-huh.
to make it. So I think the people that loved it, like our people, it seemed like our people loved it. Dominicans, Puerto Ricans loved it. It seemed
Yeah.
like there was a lot of people that were in Central and South America that did not like it. But
Yeah.
I think that when you have so many wonderful people that are doing amazing things on the ground level, liking and loving your video, telling you how good of a job you're doing,
Yeah.
that drowns out the hate. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I'm grateful for all the awesome people that were liking the video and sending me messages like, hey, you are doing amazing work. Because at the end of the day, it's not like I'm lying. This is factual information that you could find. I found it. I'm not different from anyone else that's able to pull up their phone and Google something.
Right.
So, it's people seem like they kind of want to live in a way where I feel like some people were a little racist about it. And I think that comes from the idea that people feel like Black people can't do anything. So if you give Black people the homage that they're due for a specific thing, that triggers, that goes against their mindset that Black people can't do anything. So suddenly they, you have challenged their worldview and they get really mad about that. So,
right. Yeah. Well, I think, it opens up the door to a larger conversation, sadly, that happens, historically has happened in our community. And that's the idea of colorism, right? And,
absolutely.
And sort of, shunning the African roots and history that are a huge part of making our community and culture so beautiful, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that sadly, and we've heard this, right? Like, mejorar la raza, right? The old school thing, like, date, marry somebody light skin so you have lighter skin babies and all these things, right? And horrendous, horrendous things like that. And that has unfortunately poisoned the minds of many people in our community.
Yes.
And listen, it's a historical fact. Like the slave trade went through the Caribbean, went through Latin America, you know what I mean? So like African history is very much a part of our roots as well and should be celebrated. And I think what people might be missing, specifically when they're looking maybe at you doing these videos, as a Black man, it's like you've lived a life, I'm sure, where you saw very few people who look like you, speaking on behalf of the Latin diaspora, right? Speaking to that part of yourself, so like, that's why it's so important for you to talk about this history, because it's also your history, right? Like the idea that some people get angry that you're bringing up the African history or Black history is then ignoring the fact that this is also a part of you. You know what I mean? And because it's a part of you, it's a part of us because you're a part of our community, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what so many people, need to realize. It's not about, somebody trying to commandeer your culture or take away the contributions that you've had. It's the same way in music where it's like, okay, Puerto Rico is the birthplace of like reggaeton as we know it, but its roots started in Panama, right? And that doesn't cheapen Puerto Rico's contribution to reggaeton, you know what I mean? In fact, it actually just makes it more beautiful because it actually includes more of the Latin diaspora in the history, right?
Well, the crazy thing is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the crazy thing is I had made a video because there was this guy that was on TikTok that was very Afrocentrist and he was negating the impact of indigenous culture. And I had made a video rebutting him and talking about the indigenous contributions to Latin America, along with the contributions that they made towards helping slaves. And that video went viral too. But it seemed like when I made this video talking about the African contributions to Latin America, this big thing, that's what everyone forgot about the old video. They were like, wait a minute now. No.
Yeah. Well, I think to your point, I think you kind of surmised it in a great way, is that when people get challenged as far as having to rethink what they were taught growing up, many people go into defense mode. And that's what we're seeing as a whole in this country when it comes to many of these radical white people that like are refusing to want real history to be taught, refusing to acknowledge the history of mistreatment of people of color in this country, the very well documented history of that. Again, when people feel like they're what they're taught is being challenged, they begin to feel threatened, unfortunately, many people. And they act out in ways that you're describing, and hopefully conversations like this one, allow people to understand kind of where you're coming from and also the importance of talking about history in this way, because it should be a celebration, you know what I mean? Not a separation of
it's not a challenge. It's not a challenge. It's an appreciation. Like, we are all in this together. And my personal opinion is I feel like we are all that we have.
Right.
Like it's a appreciation and we have to come together and appreciate each other. It's not, it's not you versus me. We're in this together. We're living in a rock in the middle of space.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Come on now.
Right. Right. Very, very well said. So listen, we've talked about a lot of the nonsense from this last week. I want to now kind of cleanse the palate with some positivity for our Mi Gente segment. But first, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be right back. Mi Gente. All right, so we talked about a lot of negative stuff from this last week. You have to have those tough conversations. This story is one that really touched my heart because it starts as something incredibly negative and probably plays on a lot of fears of people of color. But at least this man is getting justice, and this is the story of a man named John Galvan, and after 35 years in prison, he has proven his innocence, and ironically, it came after watching an episode of the show Mythbusters. Now, it's crazy to think that a TV show like that led to this, and I'll kind of explain the story. So basically, he was in prison for a crime that he didn't commit, and an episode of Mythbusters that he watched in 2007 that focused on Hollywood tropes that are scientifically impossible. So his backstory is that he was charged with arson and murder after a fire took the lives of two brothers in a apartment building, right? And he claimed that he was coerced through intimidation and torture by Detective Victor Swidisky and was forced to sign a confession admitting that he threw a lit cigarette onto a pool of gasoline in September of 1986. And this is according to Upworthy when he was 18, which is sad, man. A young kid with his whole life ahead of him. And according to Upworthy, he was sleeping at his grandmother's house on the night of the fire, and he was only taken to police custody after a woman who accused the killings. After a woman who was accused of the killings blamed him for the fire in what was believed to be a Latin Kings-related act of revenge for the death of the woman's brother. So basically, some random woman who was on the hot seat threw him under the bus, and of course, the police believed him. So basically, after watching this episode that dispelled the rumor that if you throw a cigarette on a gasoline, everything in its path will blow up, he contacted his lawyer, and they coordinated his third attempt at a post-conviction petition. And this time, he had the scientific proof, and now he's been exonerated. But to me, what's scary about this, and you hear this all the time, but I never can get over this fear. It's the part about the detective coercing him into a confession through intimidation tactics and torture. And this is something, sadly, we hear all the time, right? You heard it with the story of the kids in Central Park who were accused of raping that woman and only to be exonerated. We've heard it with, there's one from the podcast Serial. I'm not sure if you followed that one. He just got released, and there's all kinds of allegations that the police were actually coercing the prime person taking the stand and kind of leading his story to put Adnan as the murderer because they wanted him to be convicted. And it's just fucking scary. You can't read this and not be scared of something like this, God forbid, happening to you.
Right. It's 35. I'm 35 years old. You know what I mean? And I think about, I have a child, I have a college degree. I have all these things in my 35 years. This man has been in jail since he's 18 years old. He's 53 years old.
Yeah.
35 years. That's a long time to do a lot of things. And he's not going to be able to do that. He's not going to be able to do 35 years of his life. God, Lord willing, he gets another 35 years to make up for lost time. But I feel like our justice system, first of all, the 80s was a wild time from my understanding. Police were able to do things in the 80s that they are not able to do today. Beat you up, make you confess, make you sign paperwork, and then throw you in jail. And a lot of times, we look at people who have been in jail for so long and they get released and you're like, well, why did you sign the confession? If somebody beats your ass long enough, you're going to sign anything to get them to stop beating your ass. And my heart goes out to people like that, man, because 35 years is, again, a long time to be locked up for something that you did not do. And I really hope, I hear these stories, especially in the South, because this happens a lot in the South, where people, especially black men, they go to jail, they stay there for 20, 30 years, and then all of a sudden they're released. But a lot of times they make them sign these things that say they won't sue the state.
Right.
And I really hope that this man didn't have to sign anything like that to say that, as a part of your release, you're not going to come after us legally. Because, I mean, I think $1 million per year is well worth 35 years of your life. That's just me.
Yeah.
You should never, if you go to jail on some bullshit that you didn't do, and you get released 35 years later, you should never have to work again.
Yeah. No, at the very least, you should never have to work again. And to your point, I've never dived that deep into the law, but if that is, legal, that they can make you sign a letter saying you're not going to sue the fucking the state, like that shouldn't be allowed. You know what I mean? No. Like, especially because I'm sure it's like during the time period where they're like about to release you, and you're probably just like, I want to get the fuck out of here. I've been in here for 35 years. Like, yeah, I'll sign whatever the hell I have to. Just let me walk out the door today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that happens. That happens a lot. That happened. They made a big deal about it several years ago in Alabama because it came out. It was like they had this man on so many charges, and he had been in jail for like 40 plus years. And they were like, okay, well, if we release you to sign this paperwork that says you won't sue the state of Alabama, and he was like, I'm not suing it, and they were like, well, we're not releasing you. Yeah. So I mean,
oh my God,
it's crazy, man. But I honestly feel like if the state fucks up that bad, you should never have to work, because it's not like one person. The state has infinite resource. Even if you live in the poorest state in America, if you live in dirt mounds of Mississippi, they have almost infinite resources to get it done right.
Right.
And the fact that they don't do it right is intentional. Whether it be a prosecutor trying to get trying to aim for higher office, so he needs so many convictions, whether it's they know the person, but he's too much of a good old boy, or it's too expensive to try the person, it's intentional. At some point, you have to get down to like the intentionality of doing your job right. I work in IT. If I fuck some shit up in IT, that's my ass.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, and also you hear these horror stories of like police oftentimes get so fixated on one suspect that it makes them blind to the evidence. Right. And like that's a real thing. Anybody who watches true crime shows, knows that. Like you hear that all the time, that police can get so fixated on one person. They do whatever they can, be it purposely like this, coercing somebody, or even just mentally, rearranging the evidence in their head to make it make sense,
Absolutely.
And it's just, man, it's fucking scary. But on a positive note though, God bless this man that at least he has some sort of the rest of his life to enjoy. Right. You know what I mean? Like at least he's not behind bars for the rest of his life.
For the rest of his life.
Chance, and was able to get exonerated. But man, sad story. But man, big shout to him. I'm sure at this point he's just gladly taking.
Grateful to be out.
And
jail's
listen,
not fun.
No, get your money too, man. I want that man to get every penny that he
absolutely
is entitled to. I mean, but listen, man, I've loved getting your perspective on all of these topics today, man. It's been really fun, having you on the show. Anything you want to push people to? I know you're super active on social media, like I said, TikTok and all that kind of stuff. Anything you want to fill people in on?
Yeah, just my TikTok page. That's kind of where I put out most of my content. That's where I have the biggest following. 220,000 followers. Trying to move that more towards YouTube because that seems to be the way the money is.
Right. I hear you.
But that's it, man. I got a lot of things planned. I'm trying to make my platform something more. I kind of want to do like what you're doing, invite people on, subject matter experts on specific topics like the environment, reggaeton, whatever. And, I want to make an inclusive environment for anyone, or for most people. If they want to come on and they want to, speak their mind and things like that, I want them to be able to look to me as a platform to do so. So I'm in it for the people, man. And
love it.
I'm really just trying to, push my goals and get to where I need to be, man. But I really appreciate you having me on your podcast, man. This is a beautiful experience. I love the backdrop. You're doing your thing, man. I'm just like, this is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my bro. I appreciate you, and man, you're an inspiration to me as well, as somebody who just finally started investing in TikTok. It's great to see what you can build on there, man. So I appreciate you, and definitely would love to have you on the show again some point down in the future.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much.
Man, big shout out to my guest this week, Antonio Milian, for hopping on today's show. Make sure you go give him a follow on TikTok and Instagram. And with that said, man, I want to hear from y'all. I want to get your take on one of these topics that we talked about today in our Ask a Gringo segment. But first, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be right back.
Ask a Gringo.
I have a question. All right, so for our Ask a Gringo segment, I'm just going to do a couple questions for today's show, but a couple answers, I should say, a couple responses. But I asked y'all to weigh in on this whole Kanye thing, but more from the angle of, do you agree with platforms, canceling him essentially or suspending him, as well as companies choosing not to do business with him, kind of canceling him as well? And I want to get y'all's take on that. So again, my question was, thoughts on Kanye being blocked from social media or canceled by businesses? I'll read a couple of responses that I got here. At Marcelo31588 says, if it keeps being supported and given platforms, he'll continue to spew craziness. Yeah, I think that's the simple and most logical way to answer that question, right? And I completely agree. I think if you continue to reward people for their stupidity by putting them up on large platforms and giving them viewership and essentially free reign to spew their chaotic nonsense and harmful commentary like he's been doing, it really just creates a detriment to our society. And the more it goes on, and somebody who has a reach like Kanye West, or like our former president, who we kind of saw an example of this, them being given the ability to keep spewing nonsense and hate could eventually lead to violence against the people that they're talking out on, right? And we've seen it play out in politics, and you would hate to see, people follow Kanye down this dark hole of creating this hatred for the Jewish community and potentially acting out against members of that community for literally no reason whatsoever, right? So yeah, I think I agree with that. You can't keep supporting these people with platforms and giving them an opportunity to reach the masses with their hate speech. It just doesn't make any sense. And you can call it cancel culture. You can say we're being too woke, but at the end of the day, man, freedom of speech, you're allowed to have your freedom of speech, but that doesn't mean that there aren't consequences and repercussions for it. Now, last one I'll read. I love this simple answer. At Eric Herzog says, sucks to suck. Yeah, I think Eric is showing no empathy here for Kanye being deplatformed and companies like JP Morgan no longer wanting to do business with him. Yeah, I don't feel a shred of empathy if he loses, some of these high profile projects that he might have, or people choose not to work with him as a result of these comments. Again, you have to make the bed that you lie in. Now, if there is true mental health issues affecting this, I mean, obviously it's the only logical explanation, as to this hard turn that Kanye has made in his sort of morality, I guess you could say. Yeah, I think there is a bit of empathy that you can have in that department, but until that becomes a fact, until, he acknowledges that himself, I'm not here to declare that man, clinically insane or having some sort of bipolar, episode. That's him having to deal with that and the people around him holding him accountable, if that is in fact what's going on. All I can do is view what he's doing and putting out there into the world, and it's just not something that needs to continue to go out there. And somebody like him needs to understand, again, the consequences and repercussions for his actions. Now, with that said, man, thank y'all so much for chiming in at DJ Dramos on Instagram if you want to be a part of these conversations. And now, man, let's close things out. Let's tie everything up in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, so we talked about Kanye more than I wanted to. I'll kind of skip through that. The other thing I'll reiterate is the fact that, you can say what you want, right? You have that freedom in this country, but there are consequences for the things that you say and do, and you have to be ready to deal with them if you're choosing to, man, go out on a limb like this, or live, in this way of just talking out the side of your mouth with no regard for anybody else. There are going to be consequences, and you have to be prepared to, deal with them. Now, on the topic of Puerto Ricans, without power still a month after Hurricane Fiona, and, more deaths stacking up as a result, it's horrendous. It breaks my heart to hear stories like the one that Bianca Gralau was covering about people with health issues and the deaths that are coming as a result of them not having power and not having access to things that they need to survive on a daily basis is absolutely heartbreaking. And I just don't see how in 2022 United States citizens, because that's what they are dealing with these kinds of circumstances, and nobody seems to be batting much of an eye about it, at least here in the mainland. And it's just disgusting. And once again, I think is kind of what I was saying about poverty politics and race politics. If this was a rich, affluent white neighborhood, you bet your ass they would have had power, the next day after this. But because they're poor people of color, it's something we can kind of put on the back burner until it's convenient. And that's unfortunate history between Puerto Rico and the United States, and also people of color and poor people of color, I should say, specifically here in the United States. Now on to this pumpkin spice Tres Leches cake and the other recipes that come along with it. I still think it's blasphemy. I know Antonio said he had this pumpkin spice one and it was delicious. I'm not getting on board with this colonizer dessert that's happening right now. I want the OG Tres Leches cake, and that's that for me. It's perfect as is. We don't need to touch it with some stupid TikTok trend and some white people throwing the little pumpkin spices on there. I don't want it. Now, last thing I'll say on the case of John Galvan, who is the man who spent 35 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit and has now been exonerated. 35 years, too long. I just hope that he has the opportunity to enjoy what's left of his life, and hopefully he has many, many years to enjoy his time here on this earth. I can only imagine all that he's gone through, and it's a tragedy. And sadly, it's like not even a rare tragedy in this country. Again, like when you have, the police more interested in coming up with convictions rather than actually finding out the truth, or like Antonio was talking about, you have these prosecutors who go extra hard to make a name for themselves and oftentimes, are doing more than they need to be. And not even really looking into the matters of the case, like in this one right here. It's just terrible, and there's no other way to put it. Of course, it is a person of color, and when you are poor and a person of color, again, the legal system, man, is a very scary place, and it genuinely, sends like fear up my spine when I hear stories like this one. The fact that you could be an innocent person and they could find a way to just put a crime on you, and that's it. Your life is over. Or at least for John, he gets to live out the rest of his life. But man, 35 years behind bars since he was 18 years old. He missed out on a lot of life. But shout out to him, and shout out to Mythbusters and actually more than Mythbusters, shout out to the universe, God, whatever you believe in, for somehow making sure that John was watching TV that day, that he can catch this and start making the case for his freedom, man. Because that is crazy. 35 years for a crime you did not commit. I cannot imagine. Hopefully he gets paid, man. He deserves every penny that he's potentially going to get, man. And with that said, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Again, big shout out to my guest this week, Antonio Milian, for helping me break down some of those headlines. And man, Dramos.com, you want to pick up some merch, man, leave us a review, 5 stars, a comment, tell a friend, whatever it may be. Help us grow this community that you're all a part of. This is your voice. This is your platform just as much as it is mine. So I appreciate all y'all who have been sharing it and leaving reviews and comments and all that kind of stuff. Check out the My Cultura podcast YouTube page if you want to see the video version of the show. We're working on getting those updated in real time. And man, that's it. Hope y'all have a great weekend. Everybody stay safe. And I'll catch y'all on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Peace.